All right, greetings from East Tennessee. This is my office at East Tennessee State University. I am going to read chapter one of Gabriel's Songbook. I'm doing this on YouTube. I actually don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to give it a whirl and just read through chapter one, and that will be it. Again, this will be live without rehearsal and certainly not flawless. Chapter 1, The Dead of Night. He wrecked around midnight on the winding Rocky Bluff section of North Carolina Highway 209A. The narrow blacktop lay dusty in one particular curve where the guardrail happened to be down due to construction. A witness following him through the fog and dust and darkness said the car didn't jerk or swerve before it vaulted off the mountain road. It just kept straight when it should have turned and then disappeared into the tops of the pines that cling to the mountain's side. The only thing the sheriff and paramedics found in one piece was his Martin guitar. Less than 48 hours later, a three-legged stand of weathered gray tobacco sticks stood at the head of the mauve casket. On the stand, a burlap heart, straw-stuffed and twine-tied and frilled with sprays of dried wildflowers, framed a picture of Theodore James smiling and holding that guitar. More than 300 floral arrangements created in a flurry by the posy patch lined the walls and swelled toward the ceiling behind the casket, their soft blues and reds, gentle yellows and purples and greens blanched by the fluorescent lights overhead. 239 people signed the guest book by the door at the back of Ramsey's chapel. Then, in a solemn, shuffling line, they passed by the flowers and the casket. At the smiling picture, the line turned sharply on itself, and everybody stopped to give teary or stony condolences to Aunt Myrtle and Bobby James and the rest of the family standing by the front pew. Delbert Gunner brought up the end of this mourning line. Fiddle and bow passed together from left hand to right and back while he fussed with the faded blue galluses that crossed his shoulders. Then he stood still and looked down at the body for a few breaths. The room faded into silence. He rubbed the belly of his overalls and turned from the casket. His glistening blue gaze fell to the row of Sunday go-to-meeting shoes on the floor in front of the first pew. And he took the bow in his right hand and with a flick of the other wrist held the fiddle cradled on his left forearm. Aunt Myrtle reached for a fresh tissue. The old fiddler touched bow to string, and a variation of an old mountain melody cried for a moment before he hushed it with whispered lyrics he'd written himself, Uncle T's favorite song. Mama serves biscuits and gravy at sunrise and coffee to open our eyes. The frost is a-comin', the gathering begins, and you're missing harvest again. I slipped out of the heavy smells of tears, stale sweat, and flowers and stepped into the cool air of the late May evening, walked a half block up Main Street, hid in a doorway, and smoked. A woman I didn't know came along the sidewalk from the direction of Ramsey's funeral home and stopped in front of my hiding place to dab her eyes with a balled-up tissue. Tall and graceful, she wore beige high heels, a cream-colored dress of soft-looking acrylic, several gold bracelets, gold earrings, and a long string of pearls that looped at 3 lengths down over her breasts. I cleared my throat. "Oh," she said, stepping backward and stuffing the tissue into her purse. "I didn't see you." "Sorry to startle you, ma'am," I said. 21 years old and still don't like my folks to see me smoking. I stepped out into the light and smiled, searching for something else to say. "Have you been to the visitation for Dr. James?" I assumed she had, but in Ramsey's upper room, another visitation was being held for a mountain woman from Sodom Laurel. "Yes, I was one of his first patients before I moved up to Virginia, and I saw him now and again when I was back visiting." She looked down and brushed a tiny moth from her left breast and then looked back at me. "He must have took care of that pretty smile." "Yeah," I said, feeling my smile stretch wider for a moment and my cheeks flush. But he was my uncle, too. His sister Maggie is my mom. Oh, you poor dear. The woman touched my arm with long nailed fingers. I'm sorry, so sorry for y'all. I'm sure he was a wonderful uncle, and I know you'll miss him. Yes, ma'am. I dropped my cigarette on the sidewalk and ground it underfoot. She took her hand from my arm. Let me show you something. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Come over here, where you can see better. I took the picture and turned it so that the blue-white glare from the street light overhead didn't overpower the creased and faded image. In the background, a half-cut field of tobacco flowed down the gentle slope of a hillside and spread out across the bottomland around a creek. To the front, a young and shirtless Uncle T stood in that loose way he had, kissing a jar of what looked like ice water and draping a lean arm around the shoulders of a pretty blonde girl. The picture had a dim inscription on the back: Theodore James and Lacey, 1952. Is that you? I asked. Yes, she said with a hint of a smile, a long time ago. She stood at my elbow, so close that I felt the warmth of her body on my back and the occasional brush of the wispy fabric of her dress on my arm. I smelled her flowery perfume and the gin on her breath. Still sniffling, she took the picture from me. I was 17, she said, as she gingerly slid the picture back into her purse and brought out the tissue again. He had a Chevrolet and a guitar. She patted my shoulder, began soundless crying, and turned away without another word. What happened? I said after her. She didn't turn or give any answer I heard. She hurried up the sidewalk, got into a white Lincoln, and sped through the intersection of Main Street and Lonesome Mountain Drive, disappearing where the road bends sharply downward and right toward the hairpin curve that returns it to its course along the east bank of the French Broad River. 2 floors above Uncle T in the now silent chapel, I sat at our little kitchen table, bending over a blank sheet of paper, holding my guitar in my arms and trying to write. My tongue felt thick with whispered conversations and too many secret cigarettes. My ears rang with a sound like the echoed fluttering of mandolin strings. Before staring eyes that burned without tears, there was Uncle T, holding an arm around the proud shoulders of a country girl named Lacey, peering into my gaping mouthful of baby teeth, his sparse-haired head backlit by the greenish light that hung above. Arriving in his red Mustang convertible and a loud plaid sports coat at the Piney Ridge Methodist Church to marry Aunt Myrtle. Sitting on the porch in his sleeveless white t-shirt and khaki pants, laughing so hard at family reminiscences and dirty jokes that he had to wipe the tears from his dark eyes. Pulling out mandolin or guitar when visitors came to the old home place, still playing when they said goodnight. My pencil scratched at the silent paper. Music has always been my life. The bed squeaked as Eliza rolled over. Her dusty sleep voice mumbled a few foreign-sounding words. The light dimmed as the refrigerator compressor kicked on. In the quiet of the apartment, the old appliance sounded as sputtering and reedy as a poorly played bassoon. I put down my pencil and rubbed my face hard, trying to wipe away the sleep gathering like cobwebs around my eyes. I grabbed a pick off the table and strummed a few chords, reading what I'd written and humming quietly, trying to fit the words to some fragment of melody and rhythm. Sometimes I'm up so late at night, 'cause it's hard to find the words that rhyme and fit together right. The hands on the red rooster clock above the fridge crept past 2:30. My jaw hung slack, eyelids drooped. Face felt like it might collapse onto my chest if I didn't cave in and get some sleep. The bed squeaked again as Eliza shifted in her dream. After we'd come upstairs, she stayed awake only long enough to get ready for bed and call her good night from the bedroom door. Those days, our lives were that way. Different work, different schedules. The splitting wasn't violent, like that of a tree struck by lightning, but something subtle, almost unnoticeable, like a schoolhouse path that crosses a field and slowly forks toward two neighboring silent houses. For maybe a year after our simple ceremony at Judge Davenport's mansion in Greenville, she'd adjusted her schedule to mine, working late on the nights I traveled, getting off in time to be in the audience when I played locally, coming home early when I was there waiting. Before another year passed, we were making pretty good money for Runyon folks, over $500 a week between us. But then she stopped coordinating schedules and began working late every night, asking whenever I brought it up if I remembered how tight money was when we started out, as if that beginning had been years and years before, and saying she couldn't stand the thought of its ever being like that again. I tried to understand her fear, but I'd never been able to dread something in the future that wasn't threatening me in the present. I pushed back my chair and leaned my guitar against the wall, got up and took a Mountain Dew from the refrigerator and stood sipping it by the table. I read and reread what I'd written so far, wondering where to go with the next line. This part, the writing of lyrics, I loved most of all about songwriting, even on this edge of exhaustion. The soul churning, the stirring up of memories and feelings and dreams, the strange sensation that I was a bystander watching as the page filled with these things put into words. My old sense of the songs living whole in some other place always came back to me when I sat down to write. I walked into the shadowy living room and stretched out on the couch, staring for a moment at the bluish light from the street below that hung on the ceiling in the foreshortened shape of windows. I rubbed my face hard with both hands, yawned, and released my breath in brief, whispered grunts. Thoughts and images swirled, coalesced, dissolved. Uncle T and the new song, Eliza the Beautiful and an unbroken guitar, life like treading water. A door creaks open and then closed. The hollow sound of footsteps, the heavy booming tap of hard-soled shoes on the wooden stairs reverberates in the stairwell. Somebody's coming up. The climber reaches the second landing, and I wait to hear the door there. Nothing. Footsteps on the third set of stairs. I can't think what time it is, but I know it's late. If somebody's looking for me or Eliza at this hour, it's bad news again. Bad news coming on stone feet, slowly. When death comes in the night, Mr. Ramsay and his helpers are in the building laying out the body, but they move quickly for sleepy men, getting done whatever they need to so they can go home and crawl back in bed. These steps are ponderous, in no hurry, carrying something heavy up the stairs, perhaps carrying something heavy up to put in the stockroom across the hall. The footsteps sound on the third floor landing and stop. No labored breathing after the laborious climb. Only silence until grit grinds under heel, and whoever it is turns and comes slowly down the short hall. Stops between the door to the stockroom, where the vaults and caskets are kept, and the door to our apartment. Empty silence again. I wait to hear the stockroom door. Nothing. So I wait to hear a knock on our door as loud and slow and reverberating as the footsteps. Instead, the doorknob whimpers and the latch slides free. I remember Eliza triple checking the lock, just like every night, but the dim light of the hall spills into the living room as the door swings slowly open. I stare wide-eyed at the ceiling, frozen, breathless, somebody in the hall, waiting in silence. I try to lunge upright and face the door, but my movement is sluggish, as if I lie in deep water. I finally reach a drooping, defenseless sitting position just as the rhinestone and sequin-suited man struts into the room, glittering in his own private spotlight. "Get up, Gabriel," Uncle T says. We are outside. We turn left and walk up Back Street toward the north end of town. I can't take my eyes off my uncle, can't understand if the dazzling light that dances off the suit comes from within the man or shines from somewhere else. So different from the lightless flesh the family tearfully huddled around a few hours before, the still fingers that lay clean scrubbed and folded together as if he were only napping between patients, sparkle with rings and snap to some unheard rhythm. Gone is the dark blue suit Aunt Myrtle had him laid out in. The boots that slap the sidewalk are made of phoenix skin. His pants are the blue of a September sky, and the rhinestones line every seam. The dazzle on the shoulders and chest of the jacket is broken only by an intricate and dizzying pattern of embroidered roses blossoming at the end of greenery that climbs up the sleeves from the rhinestone studded cuffs. His Stetson glows the same shadowy white of a full moon reflected off deep snow. But it's his face that hypnotizes, the pale face with its hint of bruises and its closed eyelids white as a catfish's belly is tanned and smooth, with chiseled features and laughing eyes, just like the face in the picture the woman Lacey held under the streetlight. So I come to see where you're at, where you're headed. Silence. Gabriel James Tanner, my uncle's tone, but my voice, but my mother's words. My uncle's tone and voice, but my other's word. My uncle's tone and voice, but my mother's words. Music. I speak with an open mouth. My tongue flicks and flattens and rolls, and the sounds are nonsense. Forget making a living, Gabriel. Better and easier ways of doing that. Your music's alive. I hesitate. Then more nonsense. There's where you're thinking wrong, boy. Playing live is life for them songs. The writing in here, a ringed finger points to my chest and then sweeps away to take in the mountains and one bright western star. And the playing shoved way the hell out there somewhere ain't gonna cut it. All starts as one thing at the center, you, and radiates out like the wheel around the sun. But nobody listens, I try to say. They talk and laugh and eat and get drunk. Uncle T's dark eyes lose themselves in the shadow under the brim of his hat. We're on Lonesome Mountain Drive. Do people have to look at the sun to know it's there, to be warmed by it, to be turned round by it, to have it feed them their whole damned life? No, but it's there all the same. They look up at it sooner or later. Now, you ain't going to govern folks day and night. You've got a gift. We're on Main Street. Do you see? Uncle T stops dead in his tracks on the corner in front of his dark office. Behind him, the sign painted on the glass door reads Dr. Theodore James, DDS. And below that, in the middle of a wreath of dried wildflowers, hangs a laminated copy of his obituary. But he doesn't look. He stares straight at me. Then you'll have to leave Runyon, pack up and move to Nashville, New York, Los Angeles, somewhere you'll get noticed. From me, moans that whine and complain. Uncle T doesn't flinch. From the time I heard my first Ernest Tubb record, I wanted to go to Nashville, see if I could make it big. Then there was Lacey, then dental school for a trade to fall back on. Your Granny James talked me out of the girl and into the job. Then Myrtle and Bobby and more until I learned to be happy making music whenever and wherever I could. You ain't like that. I can't see you banging your guitar at some old folks' home on Memorial Day and being happy about it. Uncle T leans over the dental chair. Open wide, Gabriel. Wider. Wider. His fingers are in my mouth, working. You can't stay here and take whatever does or doesn't come. He pauses and looks away from me in his work, his eyes finding the dark bedroom window on the third floor of Ramsey's funeral home. Or you can leave here. Leave her. Leave Eliza. Go somewhere your chances are better. There'll be some hard years, some rainbows and guiding stars that'll just up and disappear when you think you're right ready to grab for it all. I follow Uncle T's gaze up to the window of the room where my wife nestles in her solitary warmth. My arms and throat and jaw ache with the wide open horror of some unspeakable loss. My lungs fill with ice cold wind. Choices voiced in the dead, by the dead in the dead of night, on the empty and blue lit streets of home beneath that window. I stand speechless, watching while the glittering suit shimmers and disappears in the darkness down Stackhouse Park Riverwalk. A breeze picks up, and I feel rain on my cheek. Eliza's wet kiss woke me, but she was rinsing out the coffee pot in the kitchen sink before I could get my eyes to stay open. Through the windows, I saw that the sky was lost in the gray blank of a foggy morning. What time is it? She dried her hands and turned and looked up at the red rooster clock. It's 7:15. I've got to go. She picked up her purse, checked it for her keys, came to the couch, and kissed me lightly again. Bye. I love you, she said, and turned toward the door. If I'm not at work too long tonight, I'll try to come hear you play a while. The portico, right? Then she was gone. In the bedroom, I stripped and climbed under the covers. I could still feel pockets of her warmth, but most of the bed was cold. That Saturday afternoon, Cutter was waiting for me when I pulled up to the back door of a club called the Study Hall on Kingston Pike, just off the campus of UT Knoxville. Where the hell's Eliza? He said, grunting her name as we butted chests. Where do you think? Somebody wanted to be made over for a date and she can't say no. Well, she's going to miss a hell of a party. Cutter pulled a small camera from his pocket, but we'll take pictures. After we hauled my equipment into the club and set it up, we went for a walk around campus, but the longer we walked, the quieter I became. My mother had wanted this place for me before I got married. Now the campus buildings towered over me like monuments to a future I'd turned my back on. The girls I passed on the broad sidewalks had a casual ease about their dress and movements and conversation. The boys weren't much different, only louder. They were all around the same age as me and Eliza, but they seemed so much younger, so much more relaxed. What's got you all of a sudden? Cutter asked as he unlocked his room in the frat house. I don't know, I said, and sat down on one of the two beds in the room. I looked up at him. He stood looking back, waiting. I guess I'm just wondering what all of this would have been like for me. I stood again and gazed for a moment out the only window in the small, square room, then looked down and mused over the clutter on Cutter's desk. I've been thinking a lot lately that maybe it's what I should have done, like we planned. On the morning of the day Eliza and he married, his wake-up call was not a clock radio or his mother's worried voice or Eliza's on the telephone. It was Cutter's, yanking open the bedroom door and diving on top of him. It's 8 o'clock, slug, Cutter said. I've cut school and got the old man's truck till 1. Let's get rolling. They traveled the hills and hollows around Runyon most of the morning, picking up furniture and household goods his mother had been offered for the newlyweds. Gabriel checked off the items on the list she had made, navigating as Cutter drove. They pulled around the corner onto Back Street a few minutes after 11. Ewart Clement's big, slat-sided livestock truck piled high with an apartment's worth of mismatched furnishings. Cutter leaned over the wheel and looked up the brick back of Ramsey's funeral home. You say it's on the 3rd floor? Yeah, but it's a straight shot up. And an elevator, I hope. Yeah, right. Inside the back door of the funeral home, dusty stairs rose up into the darkness in front of them. When Gabriel flipped a switch, a single naked bulb lit on the top landing. They shifted their armloads of smaller items and started up. I don't know, Gabe, Cutter said as they stood in the 3rd floor hallway while Gabriel dug the apartment key out of his pocket. This is pretty creepy. I'm surprised Eliza went for it. Well, she hasn't actually seen it yet, Gabriel said, pushing the door open. To be honest, she doesn't even know about it. At least you've got Mr. Ramsey's services right handy. That's something, I reckon. and he's already got $100 deposit. Inside the apartment, they both were drawn to the opposite wall, which was completely divided in the middle between floor and ceiling by a row of windows that brightened the room and gave a view of the tops of the buildings across Main Street, Stackhouse Park, the French Broad River, and Piney Ridge. Well, Cutter said, if you can get Eliza up here and across the living room without her killing you, this view might just save your life. You've got to admit it's a great little place to start out with. The mansion can come later. Cutter made no comment. He still stood staring out the window. Then, geez, Gabe, I can't believe you're getting married on me. We had plans, buddy. UT Knoxville, remember? I know, I didn't forget. I just didn't expect this marriage to come up so quick. Gabriel put a hand on his cousin's shoulder. Look at it this way. You'll get all the girls if I'm not around. Climb up my leg and have a ball, he said, and turned back to the door. They wrestled the borrowed furniture up the long stairs and into the apartment, and it was afternoon before they were in the truck again and driving to Eliza's to get her car. So this is it, Cutter said as he wheeled onto Eliza's road. You sure you're ready? I don't know. I think it's gotten too close. It's like being face down in the grass and trying to see the whole world. It's just too damn big to think about. Cutter turned the truck around in the Garrison's driveway. Well, good luck. Be seeing you around, I guess. Gabriel dropped from the cab to the ground. You know where I live. He watched Cutter and the big truck rumble back the way they had come. He walked to the door and knocked. Nobody was home, and he was thankful for that. He barely knew the people who that night would become his in-laws. The keys were in Eliza's car, and feeling for all the world like a thief, he drove it away. Almost 3 years had gone by since then, and here I was at UT at last. Geez, Gabe, Cutter said, that's bullshit, and you know it. You're on a different road from the rest of us. Like the yellow brick road, cuz. Yeah, right. Well, if you only knew how many guys on this campus would give at least one nut to be doing what you're doing. I laughed, touched my groin, and winced. You've got the guitar thing and that stuff, and we'd all like to bed down with a beautiful babe every night without worrying about getting caught or getting her pregnant. School is school. I still stood by the desk, going through the piles of books, listening to Cutter's homespun wisdom. A title caught my attention: Memories, Dreams, Reflections. These are all on psychology, I said. I thought you were planning to be the next Howard Hughes. I switched majors at the first of the year, Cutter said. It's the new me. I looked at him and thought the devilish grin looked the same as it always had. What knew you? I told the business world to get fucked. I'm into social work now, cuz. College hadn't changed Cutter's way of expressing himself, but something was surely different. At 8 o'clock, we went out and ate pizza with some of Cutter's fraternity brothers and their little sisters, and by 10, I was standing on the study hall's small stage, tuning, getting ready to launch into my first set. The place was already half full, with Cutter's recruited audience, male and female, and more folks were arriving in ones, twos, and threes. The waitress scooted around delivering sloshing pitchers of beer. A silent baseball game played on the TV above the bar. Balmy darkness nearly overpowered the neon signs and the 60-watt light bulb hanging on a drop cord above my head. The air filled with the smell of cigarettes, perfume, and spilled beer. Cutter had told me Bruce Springsteen's music was the big thing on campus, so I stomped 1, 2, 3, 4 on the hollow stage and banged into my version of Hungry Hearts. Midway through the set, when the club crowd was drunk enough to get up and dance to my acoustic guitar and the pounding of my boot heel, I let go. Everything worked together without thought. My voice rough in the microphone, but howling or whispering at my command, hands sweaty but locked on the guitar neck. I rolled into the third set without a break, playing for a solid 2 hours. Suddenly, it was 1 in the morning. The manager of the bar flipped on the house lights and the show was over. I collapsed into a chair beside Cutter and took a long draw on an ice cold beer. Faces I'd studied mid-song in the dim light appeared before me. Voices told me in slurred words that I sounded great. Some asked if I had tapes to sell. A guy with foggy glasses stuck a napkin and pen in front of me for an autograph. I spoke to each in a hoarse croak, and when they had gone, when only Cutter and I were left at the table, I downed my second beer and buried my face in a towel. Gabriel Tanner, a boggy sounding voice said. Fine stage name you've got there. I wiped my face and looked up, but not too far up. The man standing in front of me seemed only about a foot taller than I was sitting down. What made me come down here tonight was that name, he said. Where'd you get it? From my folks, I said. They gave it to me a long time ago. The short man's face was round as a basketball. He had small brown eyes and droopy dun mustache. His blue Hall & Oates t-shirt was stretched tight across a large middle-aged paunch, although the legs that dropped out of his big beige shorts were thin and knotty. He wore brown loafers with no coins in the tongs and no socks. An expensive-looking gold watch strained to circle his wrists, and 3 gold chains hung around his neck. His fine gray hair had been permed on small rods and topped his head like a poodle skin cap. I'll tell you what, he said. That's quite a talent you've got there. He extended one plump hand. Mo Biggs is the name, entertainment booking, and management is the game. Nice to meet you, Mr. Biggs, I said, shaking his hand after I'd wiped my own on the thigh of my jeans. I'll tell you what, Biggs said, snorting. Did you write any of that stuff you just played? Yeah, I said, quite a bit of it. That song toward the end there about some kind of magic, you write that? It's one of my newer ones. I'll tell you what, that sounded like a hit to me. You ever thought about going to Nashville? I stood up. I've thought about it a lot lately, but I wouldn't know where to go or who to see. Mo Biggs took a step closer. Well, Gabriel Tanner, it might be a fortunate thing for you and me both that I wandered in here tonight. I'll tell you what. I've been making contacts right and left in Nashville the last couple of years. Maybe we can work something out so I can introduce you around down there. You got tapes? Well, I've got some demos I've been recording at the radio station back home, I said, but they're not really country. Listen here, Buddy Rope. Nashville is getting ready to bust wide open. Country ain't going to be the only music coming out of there before long. I predict in the next 3 years it'll be the music center of the goddamn world. Biggs snorted again. I'll tell you what. We walked out to the parking lot and exchanged telephone numbers, leaving Cutter to put the dust covers on my little PA system. A band of mine's playing a joint down in Old Town, Biggs said. Let's go listen. We can talk some. I'd like to, but I can't, I said. Got a wife waiting home for me. Well then, I'll call you Monday, Biggs said, and squeezed into his car. This could be a good thing, Gabriel Tanner. I nodded and waved and went around to the back door of the bar to help Cutter carry out the equipment. I'll tell you what, Cutter drawled, laughing as Biggs drove around the corner, gave us thumbs up, and disappeared down the street behind the study hall. If I was you, cuz, I don't know if I'd trust that guy. I lit a cigarette and smiled through the smoke. Well, I've got to do something soon, I said, and I don't think I can do it by myself. We carried out the 2 PA columns and monitor, the amp, the microphones and stands and cables, and then went to the bar to get my money. When can you come back? The manager asked. I've got a few dates open in July and August. They're yours if you'll play for the same pay. I took the envelope and thumbed through the bills. $200, not bad for 3 hours. I walked out of the house and forgot my date book, I said as I stuffed the envelope in the back pocket of my jeans. I'll call you first of the week and we'll see what we can do. Cutter and I left by the back door. Why didn't you take those dates? Cutter asked when the door closed behind us. What? Come on, cuz, you know every date you've got open for the next 3 months. Didn't you get off on that crowd in here tonight? Yeah, they were great, I said. And I'll probably do the dates, but it's getting weird, Cutter. I loved it in there while I was playing, but the second a gig like that gets over, I want more. Then do the dates. I don't mean I want more of the same. I want bigger places, bigger crowds, a band, records in the record stores, songs on the radio. Ain't you got to pay dues before all that? I'm hoping my dues are about paid up, I said, rubbing the back of my neck. I reckon I'm ready. Think you'll give that Biggs fellow a call? I thought you said you wouldn't trust him. And you just said you can't do it by yourself. That's right, but Knoxville ain't exactly the place I expected to get a boost from. Well, you ain't getting no boosts from Runyon either. I looked at Cutter. He suddenly looked tired, but I couldn't let him head back to his fraternity house just yet. I had the weirdest dream the other night that after Uncle T's funeral, I said. About meeting a fat man wrapped in gold chains? Weirder than that. It was Uncle T in a rhinestone suit. He came up to the apartment and told me I had to leave Runyon. What for? For what we've just been talking about, to get out of this rut I'm in. I dug my keys out of my pocket. Got an interpretation of that dream? I do. Your subconscious is telling you to pack up your bags, throw the wife in the car, and light out for the territory, Huckleberry. Easier said than done. I took a deep breath and looked up at the black-orange city sky. You want to ride up to the frat house? I'm thinking about calling on a lady friend of mine who ought to be getting off work at the hospital, he said, and flashed his old grin. You be careful driving home through the mountains. Stay off Rocky Bluff. I will, I said, and weary to my bones, dropped into the car and drove away. All right, so that's chapter 1, The Dead of Night. I'll hit another chapter again soon. Thanks. Bye.